That was funny. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, ranking member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressman Matt Green, MD. Congressman Matt Green first took the oath of office to represent the 7th District of Tennessee in Congress on January 3, 2019. As a successful business leader, decorated combat veteran, ER physician, and former Tennessee State Senator, Green is uniquely equipped to represent the people of his district. Throughout his tenure in government, Congressman Green has sponsored 24 pieces of legislation and co-sponsored 168 pieces of legislation over issues facing the people of Tennessee, from strengthening rural health care to holding China accountable, to supporting Gold Star families and bringing American businesses back home. Congressman Green's well-rounded background in business, healthcare, and the military has made him distinctly qualified to address such issues. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium, all the way from Clarksville, Tennessee, into these lovely warm shores in Barbados, Congressman Matt Green, MD. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? Is everybody well? It is absolutely beautiful out there. I will say it's a little bit different than where I was back in 2002 about this time. I actually got to be the physician who went into Baghdad with our special operations forces. I was the first doctor to go into Baghdad. And in that job, my first task when I hit the ground was to find a vehicle that we could use as an ambulance in the event that any of the guys got wounded. So I got into Baghdad and I started looking around and I found this Nissan pickup truck and I thought this would be a perfect ambulance for any of the guys if they get hurt. So I go over to the vehicle, I rip open the steering column, and I started hot wiring the truck. Now, I'm not a criminal, okay? They teach you this stuff in special operations. But just as I'm about to get the vehicle started, and by the way, this is all in accordance with the Geneva Convention. The United States reimbursed the Iraqis for all of this. But just as I'm about to get the vehicle started, this guy with a huge beard comes up, and he grabs me, and he spins me around. And a quick show of hands, has anyone here ever gotten caught stealing a car? Anybody? I thought I was a dead man, but he quickly told me the agency of our government that he worked for and that he'd already stolen that truck. That was his truck. So I start walking away thinking I've got to tell my SEAL team commander I have no vehicle as an ambulance. And I guess the guy felt sorry for me and he said, "Hey buddy, down at the end of the runway, there's a powder blue Nissan Maxima and it has the keys in the ignition." So I hoofed it down there, sure enough, there it is. Hop in the car, hit the keys, nothing happens. Lift the hood, someone had stolen the battery. So I'm walking back, thinking I have to tell the SEAL team commander that I failed in my mission, but I passed that Nissan truck. And there's no agency guy anywhere around. And I'm thinking Nissan Maxima, Nissan pickup truck. I look left, I look right. I stole his battery. And it was a perfect fit. It went right into the Maxima, and I drove the Maxima in. The SEAL team commander gets in the vehicle, and we spend the rest of the night as the rest of the city fell. Unfortunately for me, the story doesn't end there. Several months later, I'm in the Post Exchange, which is sort of like a sundries store that travels around the battlefield with soldiers as they deploy so that they can buy shaving cream and sodas and things like that. And as I'm in the checkout line, in walked that bearded agency guy. And he recognizes me. He makes a beeline straight to me, pokes his finger in my chest and says, "Hey buddy, did you steal my battery that night we came into Baghdad?" And I said, yes, sir, I'm a thief, but not a liar. I took your battery. He said, no worries. I had taken that battery out of the Nissan Maxima I sent you down to go get. With that, the guy walked away. I never saw him again. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share a few thoughts with you. And I want to thank Upturn Funds for extending this invitation to bring me here and to this beautiful island. It is my first trip to Barbados. I promise you this, it will not be my last. The United States and the nations of the Caribbean have a special relationship. We are not just neighbors, we're economic collaborators, security collaborators, and of course, partners. What's good for the United States is good for the Caribbean. What's good for the Caribbean is good for the United States. Unfortunately, for too long, U.S. foreign policy has largely ignored our neighbors in the Western Hemisphere, particularly the Caribbean. And we've seen the detrimental effects of that detachment. From China's debt trap diplomacy, to Russia's extensive disinformation campaigns, Iran's funding of terrorism, to Taiwan's growing diplomatic isolation, to rising instability and surging immigration at our southern border. America's aloofness towards the Western Hemisphere has created a vacuum, and that vacuum has rapidly been filled mainly by Russia and China. And unlike the United States, which seeks mutually beneficial relationships, Russia and China care about only themselves. As the ranking member of the U.S. House of Representatives Western Hemisphere Subcommittee to the Foreign Affairs Committee, it's been my mission to reorient U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America and the Caribbean and reverse some of this damage. What does this reorientation look like? Well, it means a lot of things. It means bolstering our diplomatic ties, our relationships, our friendships, security ties, and of course, economic ties. And we have to bolster our relationships. In the Middle East, they talk about 3 cups of tea before you can really get something accomplished. My experience in the Middle East taught me that that's really true about every interaction. We need relationship, connection, and I think reestablishing that is very important. And that's why I introduced House Resolution 1232, the Diplomatic Personnel Modernization Act, to require a 5-year staffing study at the Department of State. Unfortunately, chronic vacancies at the U.S. State Department have impacted our diplomatic relations, whether it's in Washington or at our diplomatic posts worldwide. And tragically, and this is according to the Government Accountability Office, the State Department had no plan to fix it. That's unacceptable. And that's why I passed this legislation last year as a part of the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act to give the State Department the power to fill those vacancies. We have ambassadorships in Latin America that have been unfilled for over 6 years. My bill is a step in the right direction to fix that. Reorientation also means bolstering security ties, such as holding joint military exercises and increasing our security cooperation. And that's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of someone else's bill, HR 4133, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative Authorization Act. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation supported throughout the Congress, and it was introduced by a dear friend of mine, Congressman Adriano Espiat, a Democrat, and it has widespread congressional support. The bill would allocate nearly $75 million, doubling it from previous passage, each year to improve security cooperation with our Caribbean partners. Funds would be focused on combating illicit drug trafficking, supporting the rule of law, judicial reform, strengthening things like responses to natural disasters. And I'm proud that this bill has passed the House. I'm optimistic it'll pass the Senate and be signed into law. And finally, the third element of this reorientation is bolstering our economic ties, such as through free trade agreements, new free trade agreements, and of course, harmonizing our existing agreements, and as I'll be talking about most of today, nearshoring. Bolstering our economic ties is the key, I think, to making this bold reorientation happen. And as you know, a growing and diverse and vibrant economy is key to every nation, and I believe the best way to increase economic opportunity for the United States and our allies in this region is nearshoring. Nearshoring can be described as basically bringing jobs and industry back to our hemisphere, particularly manufacturing from China, a regime with an egregious human rights abuses. According to estimates by the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, nearshoring could add an annual $78 billion in additional exports of goods and services in Latin America and the Caribbean in the near and medium term. $78 billion. To put this into perspective, in 2021, the GDP for Barbados estimated to be about 4.9 billion in US dollars. Such a huge influx of capital from nearshoring would mean massive growth if concentrated in countries like Barbados. Now, the IDB recommends that we execute this using a 3I strategy: investment, infrastructure, and integration. Investments mean what it sounds like: creating a business-friendly environment, not scaring companies away with hostile rhetoric or nationalization of industry. Infrastructure means building and repairing roads, seaports. You have to get the goods and services out. And integration involves increasing and harmonizing those trade agreements so that it's not some patchwork between one country and another and different for the relationships with other countries. My bipartisan bill, House Resolution 7579, the Western Hemisphere Nearshoring Act, co-led by my Democrat and dear friend across the aisle, Chairman Albio Ceres, addresses all of the 3 I's. It addresses investment through ultra-low interest development finance corporation loans, while urging countries to reduce bureaucratic red tape, streamline permitting, and embrace free market principles. It helps address infrastructure by providing technical assistance for electrical grids and decreasing the application process, streamlining the process for nuclear reactors. And it addresses integration by directing the U.S. Trade Representative to obtain trade agreements with our Western allies with whom we have no agreements. The bill is a win-win-win, and it makes American supply chains less vulnerable to communist China, and it will create more jobs and economic growth in Latin America and the Caribbean. And as opportunities increase in the Western Hemisphere, the nearshoring of manufacturing will decrease migration to our southern border. It's my goal to get this bill marked up in this Congress, where amendments can be offered and improvements made. I want to listen to everyone. I had the State Department review the bill. They are of a different party than me, but I sought their advice on how to make this bill work. I gave it to Democrat and Republican colleagues. I've sent it to industry, and I ask you to take a look at it. You can find it online. I'll present it more in a moment when we get into the whiteboard session. Nearshoring holds the promise to lay the foundation for a new era of partnership and friendly relations between the U.S. and the Caribbean. And with this legislation, we can foster stronger commercial ties while enabling the dynamic development of diverse industrial economies and raising the standard of living for people living in poverty. This will, of course, lead to less migration and refugees at America's southern border. The border crisis is overwhelming our Border Patrol and local governments. It's also led to skyrocketing sexual assaults, kidnappings, and the deaths of refugees, making this incredible journey to the United States. We have to address the root causes and stem the flow of this migration. As we face the challenge of bringing back manufacturing to the Western Hemisphere, the United States must look to empower our neighbors for our mutual benefit and long-term prosperity. The Chinese Communist Party harbors aggressive strategic ambitions that start with dislodging the United States and creating an international world order that serves their interests. Through industrial espionage, forced technology transfer, extensive intellectual property theft, China and its network of state-sponsored enterprises have been able to corner the market on key industries. I don't blame countries for partnering with China. There are countries that have economic needs, opportunity needs. I understand, and we harbor no ill will, but understand this: investment from China comes with a price. Over the last few decades, many manufacturing jobs have left Latin America and the Caribbean, left the United States, and gone to China. According to the Inter-American Development Bank, that's about $80 billion. China now controls the production of many essential resources in our supply chain. They also dominate the supply of strategic minerals, such as rare earth metals, and I understand Upturn has some presentation on that later in this conference. The world is also deeply dependent on China for medicine and medical supplies, such as PPE. 70% of the United States acetaminophen, Tylenol, comes from China. 50% of our penicillin comes from China. And China is the manufacturer of the pharmacologic precursors for the vast majority, thousands of drugs in the United States. Fortunately, the US is taking steps to decrease our dependence on China. Instead, we want to offer a closer partnership with our allies in Latin America and the Caribbean. It'll take more than just action from the United States. We need partners, and we need to be a good partner. What does this mean in practice? Well, for starters, governments have to recognize that the private sector is the engine of job creation and economic growth. And I say this from experience. As a successful businessman, I founded and served as the CEO of an emergency medicine management company. I brought that company in just 8 years to over $200 million in annual revenue. We created basically 11 states. We worked for 52 different hospitals in 11 states. And this year, the company's valued at $1.6 billion. I understand how to create economic opportunity. And if governments want to do this, we have got to create a business-friendly environment and let the private sector compete, innovate, and operate without undue burden and restrictions. This means increasing privatization, cutting taxes, and decreasing unnecessary regulation. It also means welcoming foreign investment, and I hope that'll be from the United States. It also means that nations in Latin America and the Caribbean must strengthen our ties with the United States. Russia and China do not have our best interests at heart, but America seeks a mutually beneficial partnership where we work together both diplomatically, economically, and in security partnerships. As the ranking Republican, I'm willing to work with any government in the Western Hemisphere that respects the rule of law and market-driven models of economic growth. These are the nations that will attract private investment and create long-term sustainable jobs for the future. Nearshoring is our key to mutual success and prosperity. And I believe my bill, the Western Hemisphere Nearshoring Act, has the potential to jumpstart a new era of US-Caribbean relations and lead to a brighter future for all of us. It's an honor to speak with you today, and I look forward to sharing the mechanics of the bill in just a moment. Thanks to Upturn Funds for the opportunity to come and speak today and for this visit to an amazing and beautiful island whose people are even more beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, U.S. Congressman Mark Green. Very, very captivating points in terms of becoming economic collaborators between the U.S. and the Caribbean, and also bolstering security ties and economic ties through a U.S. free trade agreement. Thank you so much for that. At this time, this brings us to the end of our opening ceremony, and we are going to take a short 5-minute break. Just one little announcement. Those of you who are pre-registered for lunch and coffee break, you should have 2 ticket stubs with you upon registration, and the ushers will direct you to the washrooms and the restaurant where lunch will be served and also for break. So we are going to gather here again within the next 5 minutes, and we're just going to take a little break. Thank you.
5 minutes break. So if you could please assemble back at your tables. Thank you. So the ranking member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressman Matt Green, gave us a snapshot of the Bipartisan Western Hemisphere Nearshoring Act. It is my honor, again, to invite him back to the podium to share with us a little bit in more detail this bill so that we can have a better understanding of what's involved and how we can support this effort and his initiative. So please, let's give the Congressman a warm welcome back to the podium. Thank you.
So now digging into the details so that everybody kind of understands it. And do we have the slides? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. During China's rapid growth, the commodity boom created a demand for currencies in Latin America and the Caribbean that inflated those currencies and thus made it much cheaper to buy manufactured goods made in China than as opposed to made, oh, thank you, perfect. Got it. Than those made at home. And so the manufacturing base in Latin America, really in many countries all over the world, died. And what it created, obviously, is a loss of jobs. And that loss of jobs is problem number one. One of the things that COVID disclosed to us is a desperate dependence on China for manufacturing of PPE, protective equipment, and pharmaceutical precursors, but it amplifies the manufacturing dependence that's been created with the rapid growth of China. The COVID crisis, additionally, both with decisions made in China and how they addressed the COVID crisis and the United States, created this supply chain crisis, which has resolved to some extent, but what we're experiencing, particularly on the West Coast, is a continued backlog of shipping. And as China recently closed an entire city, the production of goods and services from that city were stopped for 90 plus days, 25 million people. That continued mechanism for addressing COVID outbreaks, along with the backlog at our ports, will continue to impact the issue of the long supply chain from China. And the consequence of the loss of opportunity in Latin America, the shoring of jobs in China, the revelations about our dependence on Chinese manufacturing means that there has been a mass migration across the United States southern border. To put this into perspective for us, this year 3.3 million people will come into the United States across our southern border. 3.3 million. 21 states in the United States have populations less than 3.3 million, meaning a moderately sized state will enter the United States this year alone. Now, I am a conservative Republican, as you may know, But I also am a firm believer in bipartisanship, or our partisanship ends at the water's edge, and I'm outside the United States, so I'm not going to go into the issues surrounding part of this. But clearly, the push factors for migration I can talk about and I want to talk about, because I think addressing those root causes can be a solution that in Washington, D.C., both parties can agree on. So what we're after here is a win-win-win, and it's very possible. We can nearshore manufacturing from China, create jobs in Latin America, decrease our dependence on Chinese manufacturing, and of course, decrease pressure on the U.S. southern border as opportunities are created in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, here's basically how we're going to do it. Let's see. Can you guys hear me okay? Oh, the participants online. Okay. I can't be that Southern Baptist preacher that my father raised. So if you'll look at the graphic in the upper, or in the right-hand side of the slide, basically we are going to take, as you know, the Development Finance Corporation uses investment dollars. So let's say an American sells a company, or someone sells a company. Someone sells a company, and they've got an amount of money they want to invest. And they can invest that money through the Development Finance Corporation. They get a market rate of return for that investment. What we do with the China tariff money that I appreciate President Biden leaving in place, those tariffs can buy that interest rate down for the borrower. So a company manufacturing in China can get a super low interest loan, and with the current interest rates going up, the cost of capital is going up. So those low interest loans are very appealing. That corporation moves, and the corporation has to meet certain criteria. It has to qualify for this move, but it meets certain criteria. It can make that low interest loan with the DFC, move basically to Latin America or the Caribbean. It has 3 years to start manufacturing. And what we're going to do as an incentive is provide free trade regardless of the country that the company moves to. Now, we have some restrictions. Obviously, we're not going to let a Chinese-owned enterprise get a loan from the Development Finance Corporation. And we're also going to not let those companies move to places like Cuba. That makes no sense for us. So there are some restrictions, but essentially that's the process of how the loan system works. As I said, the company has to meet certain qualifications. It can't be a state-owned enterprise, but it doesn't have to be a U.S. company. That's important. It has to be moving from the People's Republic of China. So it has to be leaving China, and it has to move to a country in Latin America and the Caribbean. Again, it can't go to Venezuela, Cuba, or Nicaragua. And we're going to let the Development Finance Corporation administer these loans. Now, our goals, of course, are to increase our influence in the region. We feel like, as I said in my opening comments, we've been negligent with our neighbors in the Caribbean and in the Western Hemisphere. And so we want to improve our influence, and we feel like this is an opportunity to reduce economic dependence on China and increase partnerships with the United States. And as I've mentioned before, illegal immigration, we want to address that issue. In conclusion, you look at the benefits across the board. Using the Development Finance Corporation, it doesn't require taxpayer dollars. The rates are brought down for the tariffs on China. It gives us increased influence. Companies move to Latin America and the Caribbean. Low interest loans for that move. Free trade with the U.S. Decreased transportation costs on the supply chain because the supply chain is decreased. Countries partnering with us. More American influence in the region. Obviously, we want that for America. We want to be a better partner. Global decrease in the reliance on Chinese manufacturing. saving the workforce from immigration pressures. And what do I mean there? I had the Guatemalan ambassador tell me, Mark, we're losing an entire generation of laborers who are leaving our country and coming to yours. What's our 10-year, 20-year forecast if they all leave our country and go to yours? So we have a responsibility to fix this issue. And of course, the US border, which I've mentioned. So there are wins in this opportunity. And again, the mechanism is simple. We'll take China tariff money that the Biden administration left in place, buy down the loan rate, the investor invests, gets a great return, the borrower borrows and gets a low interest loan. They pick up, they move to Latin America. The loan agreement allows them to borrow money not only for the physical move, but also for the development of the workforce, so training and workforce development. And it allows for the use of energy grid development to include up into small room-sized reactors, allowing nuclear energy, clean, green energy, to be used to guarantee power for those companies that move their manufacturing base. So the opportunity is here. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to share it. Thank you.
Thank you, U.S. Congressman Mark Green. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. Rafael De Angelis. He stepped out for a moment. He stepped out, okay. Before Rafael comes, we're just going to have a little change in our program. I would like to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Alice Hotak, President and founder of HSN, Human Rights Inspector and UN Peace Ambassador, offering 30 years of experience in business offers, entrepreneurial, forward-thinking mindset, and demonstrated track record of achievement, project implementation, investments, and consultant. And today, Ambassador Hotak is going to be speaking on a session, Maritime and Road Transportation, the creation of an inter-island road transportation and ferry service, the development of an economic corridor between Barbados, Trinidad, and Guyana, Suriname, connecting the Caribbean economy through a maritime transportation system. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ambassador Alice Hotak.
Alice actually is going to join us right after the introduction of the project itself, because we want to take the momentum of Mark Green's presentation that shows investment into the region and demonstrate first in how a maritime corridor in the region can actually make that initiative that he's proposing much bigger than we ever can imagine. And we can start it, you can move to the next, oh, it's right here? Okay. So, what is the Maritime Corridor? It's really a channel where goods and services, tourism, shipping and cargoes can actually, I can use this one, it's okay, can actually make it easier for Caribbean countries to manufacture within its states. Because what we notice in the Caribbean, that one area is cheap energy, the other area is cheap labor, and this allows now manufacture to have its normal logistics flow, which one country that is best at this will manufacture this part, and is the easy way to transport that goods to another country that makes the cost for export to be able to compete in the foreign market, particularly against China. And based of what we know about the Caribbean and the studies that we have done, one of the biggest elements that we need to bring stability in is the food supply. We need to lower the cost of food for the Caribbeans. The only way we can do this is develop this maritime project in its first leg, which is Guyana. Guyana has the potential to really change the dynamic of the region into the billions of dollars of infrastructure investment that is expected to take place there. but also a thriving agribusiness industry that will benefit the United States and the region overall by being able to export cheaper product out of Guyana into the rest of the region. Boat transportation is the cheapest method of transportation that there is. Guyana is blessed enough to have 3 rivers that all of them can be navigated and can be actually loaded in barges in bulk shipment and ship it around the region. So there's very few countries that has this incredible advantage into the transportation system. So we saw Guyana as being the initial connector for the rest of the region. Agriculture products. And based on our analysis that is going to be presented by Michael in New York, we feel that these first 3 connectors has to be established. One, it's because to rebuild Guyana, we need to provide labor, we need to provide infrastructure and cheap energy to start that process. Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana has a natural connector to make that happen. Industries can be established in Trinidad and Tobago that supports Guyana, and industries can be started in Guyana that can support the region. And we know that Guyana is scheduled to be not only the provider of major opportunities economically for the region, but also to become the food and bread supporter of the region. And the idea is to make that happen by initializing the project of the corridor. Within the project, we look at the CARICOM countries and say, how can we bring them all online? And that's when you see the connector of Barbados as a link that can actually extend it through all the islands. You know, and what is the most interesting about this is that every time you analyze the economic impact in each island, the numbers were shockingly high, that because these countries never got together in 40 years to do this, an impact of something, a logistic connector, can be bigger than any economic initiative that we know today in the market. And this is the economic theory of the IMF into development, which is this particular subject matter is very studied. So we understand very deeply in how logistics integration connect with economic development. And it's based on that we are pushing this initiative. And at the same time, the Mark Green is pushing for financing for industry development, we are pushing for the base for that development to grow, for the base for that development to take off in the levels that we never saw possible. And that's why this corridor is so important. And from this point on, I'm sending to the experts, which is actually you guys going to see a financial study in what the economic benefit this is. And this is Michael Malman from our group in New York City.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all. So when running our analysis with all the countries in the Caribbean community, we noticed a very strong trend.
Pleasant good morning, everyone. I will start with Caribbean integration. Okay. Caribbean integration. This has been discussed in the Caribbean for decades. We have had plans and talks about Caribbean integration for many, many years. In May 2011, the United Nations declared a decade of action for road safety, which made road safety management pillar 1 of the decade. And pillar 1 of the decade include registration systems of driver and vehicles. And this was mandated since 2011. Every government in the region has signed on to this petition. So they are aware that road safety management and putting systems in place is what we need to integrate the Caribbean. And this have been introduced in Antigua and Barbuda in the year 2000, where we had a registration of driver and vehicles and a data management system that can be shared. So the registration systems will put driver and vehicles in a data management system that can be shared within the region and harmonize the introduction of the ferry service. So in order to have a ferry service operated within the region, we need to have these registration systems that I will demonstrate now why we need these registration systems. Agriculture needs transportation. Governments need systems and data management to integrate and trade it in the region. The system is also a crime-fighting tool to assist the police in controlling crime and other discrepancies. national security concerns, listen to great ideas and visions. This vision started in the year 2000, and over the past 22 years, I've presented this to 17 Caribbean countries. And repeatedly over the years, consistently, not giving up, because I see the need for integration. We don't need a pandemic to tell us that we need to put systems in place. At the recent Agricultural Forum in March, heads of governments at the meeting were asking, what do? We are in a situation now, we have a food crisis, we have production, we need to trade, we need to export, we need to share within the region. And this is the time we need our neighbors. This is the time we reach out to one another. How do we share and integrate the region? How do we share goods and trade within the region? And they were asking the question, where do we start? What do we do? All these questions were being asked. So this is a solution that I want to propose now, that we need this registration system to harmonize the ferry service. So let me pull up my presentation. And the registration system includes: 1, to register driver and vehicles and marine vessels using a data management system to share and integrate the region; 2, transportation of people, agricultural goods, vehicles, and labor from island to island, adopting a common Caribbean license plate and driver's license, and to give governments the enforcement tools for control of a high security system. And the security features, which would include effective enforcement tools for crime and security of vehicles, drivers, vessels, and data management. Because 90% of all crime is motor vehicle related. We also have situations where vehicles were stolen from one island and taken to another island and sold. So all these problems that we have associated with no systems in place, no data management, and no control. So with this new system now, we can tell right away if a vehicle comes off the port, their readers can tell us. We have RFID readers, which can radio frequency identification systems, which can tell us right away, this vehicle was registered in this island, it belongs to this person, and it's been lost, and stuff like that. So data management is very crucial now within the region, and we need to put technologies in place. Some of the security features that we have for the license plates include the third license plate sticker, which is a sticker that goes on the inside of the windscreen that also carries the number of the license plate. So if someone tries to remove the sticker, it is completely destroyed. The information is not transferable. So that is one of the security features that we have. We also have vehicle license plates identification system, which is OVDs, optical visual devices, laser embedded emblems into the background of the license plates. And this makes it very difficult to duplicate. And also, we have a plan to make each license plate country specific. So we design a license plate and a classification system for each island. So that is the only way we can then integrate the region if we have identity for each island. So then we can go drive onto the ferry service and drive off into another island, and our data will be transferable. And these are some of the security features, and also the possibility of a CARICOM driver's license as well. So we can also use that for travel within the region instead of passports and having to fill out forms for arrival and departures and so on. A data management system, and this is how we think, the transnational organization within the Caribbean. A board with members indicated by the member countries with focus in designing policies and monitoring the data management system. Operating contractor and system vendor, private companies that will handle the development, implementation, and operations of the transnational data management system. Data management systems, DMS, will be used to integrate and share data among the member states moving them closer, feeding the movement of people, vehicles, goods, and labor and transportation. So in order to have the ferry service operational, we need to put all the systems in place as early as soon as possible. And some of the benefits of putting systems in place and integrating the region will include improving public security, efficient vehicle and tax monitoring, creation of reliable database, quick identification of vehicle and owner, increase in revenue by the government, regional integration and identification. License plate will be made under the control of the government. Employment will be provided locally. The plates will be made in each island. Movement of people, vehicle, and vessels. Transportation of goods within the region and transportation of labor. So this is a time where we need to know who our neighbors are and how we can trade, and prepare for the future. We need to put systems in place for the Caribbean. There is no long-term planning for the Caribbean. If we can do a 10 or 20-year planning for the Caribbean, say, okay, let's do a project that has a long-term plan. Doesn't matter if the governments change, doesn't matter if ministers change. We need to stick to a long-term plan. This is the only way we can accomplish what we're set out to do and to see it successful. And in conclusion, I would like to say today, with the support of the US Congress and Congressman Green and everyone here today, that we need to make this a very historical time for the Caribbean. We need to put systems in place to move goods, people, and services within the region. With a day for government to support, to create long-term plans for the Caribbean, a day to support trade within the region, a day for planning for the future, and for sustainability and for future generations. A day for action, and we need to succeed. We need to put these plans in place. And we need to listen to great ideas and vision, Don't wait until we have money to do it and then you get the attention, We want, if there is a good plan, if there is a good idea, please listen to what people have to say, because you don't need a pandemic and 22 years after to say, okay, I want it now. Whatever you were proposing 22 years ago, we want it like yesterday now. We don't need to do that. We need to do long-term planning. We have the talent in the region. We have a data management company that developed the software for the Caribbean, and the software is customizable for Caribbean legislations and laws. I wouldn't recommend that we use a data management company from anywhere else, because it will be more costly and it will be a challenge, because our laws are still outdated, right? We have, for instance, for example, in Antigua, we still have a radio and TV license. And to put that in a computer language, you have to put the radio license and the TV license, where with the computer language now, we can just say, okay, appliances or electronics. So we have a lot of situations that we deal with that the legislation has to be updated before we can put systems in place. So converting all this to computer language and data management was done by a company in Antigua. I have worked with a company for 7 years, and we have the technology in the Caribbean. We have the experience as well. I have been working with a German company for license plates within the region for the past 17 years. I have been trained in operations of the machinery, how to make the conversion, how we can introduce it in the Caribbean here. And it was very successful in Antigua. Although presently we need an update. We need to update the security features and design it for integration now. So there will be a new system starting to integrate the region with country-specific identity. And this is our proposal for the region. We're looking forward to working with everyone here to give us their support. And we're hoping that we can start this as integration and registration as soon as possible. And also the route of the ferry service that we're looking at, the distance, we have calculated the distance of travel between the Golden Triangle that we mentioned. And this has been written. The problem we have in the Caribbean is implementation. We have the policies, we have the projects, we have it on paper, it sits on a desk, and there's no implementation company. What I am offering today, what our companies are offering, is an implementation plan with experienced companies, experienced people, determined to succeed. We have been writing this for the last 22 years. We have the project, we have the framework, it's ready to go, and we're anxious and ready to get the system rolling. So we are 100% ready, and this have been written and ready to go for many years. So we're looking forward to working with every organization that can help us to get this going. And that's in conclusion that we would like to introduce the ferry service and put these systems in place. And we're looking forward to doing this as soon as possible. Thank you all.
Now, we have to figure out how to pay for it, right? So, because this is not a cheap endeavor. So Michael Malman now is going to present it to you, the solutions that we have into financing this project and what the economic benefit can trigger in the region and why this is so important and the money is worth to be invested.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you all. Yes. So, as the Congressman Mark Green was saying earlier before, trade does make countries wealthier, right? So when we started analyzing this project, both sides of the project, so the data management system and also the ferries connecting the Golden Triangle in the phase 1 and the whole CARICOM countries in the phase 2, we started analyzing the tradeness, the openness to trade, and also the per capita. And we could see a very strong correlation between the two variables, saying that the more open to trade a country is, the richer its population will be, and it is in the region, right? So based on our, Tony, can you go to the next slide, please? Next one. Yes. So according to our calculations, and based on studies of what happened in similar countries with similar projects, we estimate that by implementing such project of integration in the CARICOM countries, we could generate an extra 15% economic growth over the next decade, meaning 1.5% growth GDP per year above the baseline, right? And one of the main points of this gain would be the gain from US nearshoring, as the US would bring these investments to the region and it would have more factories and trade and so on, right? So about the financials, let me just change my slide too. Yeah, so the project is estimated, the full project, the data management plus ferry, is estimated to cost around $780 million in the worst case scenario. It includes more than 8 million cars registered with plates changed, more than 8 million driving licenses across the region, right? As I mentioned previously, we expect the GDP to grow by 15% above the baseline in the next decade, which could generate $65 billion in GDP for these countries, right? Of course, it would increase the tax base of the countries, and it would increase the revenue for the governments, local governments. So when studying the finance, how to fund this project, we arrived at some numbers. So considering the worst case scenario cost, it would cost 57 cents of a dollar per person per year to fund the interest rate, to fund this project. So it's a very cheap cost to integrate the full area, the full region, and to have such growth in 10 years. The full implementation would cost around $27 per person in the CARICOM countries, and the total gain after 10 years would be above $2,000, meaning when we run a cost-benefit analysis, It's a clear gain to the region. Tony, next slide. Well, the financials are basically it, and we can share more details with you when time comes. Thank you very much for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael Mollman, Chief Financial Officer, Upton Funds, New York, and Raphael and Ambassador Hotak for your presentations. We are now going to transition to our panel discussion as we continue to dive deeper into the issues presented, and this is definitely going to be interactive. And so I will invite moderator and panelists to the stage behind me, and you will be seated in the order in which I call your names. This panel will be moderated by His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Andrew Thomas. So Dr. Thomas, I invite you to sit to my far left, and the persons responsible for miking the panelists, if you could please bring the microphones as well. Followed by the panel, which will comprise of Congressman Mark Green, Raphael DeAngelis, Her Excellency Ambassador Alice Hotak, Honorable Howard Lovell, the leader of the opposition, or the leader of the United Progressive Party, Antigua, Lord Robert Orville Thomas, Register of Phoenix Development and Astute Dynamic. Do you need me to repeat the order? Oh. So, following Congressman Green will be Raphael, Ambassador Hotak, Honorable Howard Lovell, Lord Orville Thomas, Register, Mr. Robert Forrester, Board Advisor for Pleon Inc. See here, yes. Patrick Tannis, Chairman of Tannis Consultancy Inc. And we have a virtual panelist in the person of Sikau Alain, CEO, InvestDT. Dr. Thomas, over to you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, it has been a very hopeful presentation, because the presentation that Congressman Matt Green has shared has actually given us a roadmap for a new possibility within the region. So we can clearly see that there are significant possibilities. And it's also very clear that to do this, the Caribbean needs to develop the infrastructure for it. Now, if you look historically at the region, when the possibilities for tourism became very clear to the political leadership and also to the private sector leadership, there was a move to build the infrastructure for this, the hotels, the airports, and the ports, because success happens when preparation meets opportunity. And so there has been a successful model of this. And now there's need now for another push. But this is a push now towards creating the logistics infrastructure to really support this. I'm going to first of all start by bringing in our virtual guest, and this one I'm really looking forward to hear from every member of the team. I'm going to bring in our virtual guest, Sekou Alin, who really wanted to be here. He's the CEO of Invest Now TT, which is a government agency responsible for investments. And right now, okay, Trinidad is the manufacturing base for the region. And so I actually want your comments on the Nearshore Act and what your thoughts are and what's required to actually seize the opportunity. So over to you, Sekou. Can we hear him now, or I should move to the next person? Huh? Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hear from Patrick Tannis, and I want to hear some words from you, and then I'll hear from Roger Forrester, who works as a consultant for government in the nation of Guyana, and we're currently actually working with him to develop a port project now within Guyana. So this is very, very significant. He's a client of Upton Funds. So let's start with Patrick Tannis, and just if everyone could keep their comments to about 3 minutes so we can go through. Yeah, okay.
First of all, thank you, Ambassador. It's an honor to see Congressman Mark Green and my good friend Louis. I preach in Knoxville, Tennessee at Grace Baptist Church. So I heard all about you and your practice there. Your name is famous. It's good to have you here, right? Now, history tells us a story, and let me just run there and then run back to the future. Just down the road in what was then Austin's, in 1652, the words emerged when Cromwell wanted to reinvade Barbados from the UK. The words emerged, "There will be no taxation without representation," 1652. That document became what was the precursor to the United States Declaration of Independence. It was signed by 3 Barbadians, and it was printed by a Barbadian. And what was then the Carolinas, which included East Tennessee, was founded by Barbadians. And so Charleston is a Barbados city. And so the East Tennessee, the 3 million people that are there, we know that there are strong links to Barbados and the areas there. And so, having said that, we want to say that today is a marquee day. We don't know what was going on exactly in 1652, but we know that regional integration is necessary. We know that these investment strategies are necessary. While we were speaking, I was texting the Prime Minister just now to just share with her an update. And then we have here with us Minister Sandra Husbands, who's in charge of foreign trade. She just came in. And so we know that when we capture the moments here, we know that those moments will augur to great success. And just give me one more minute to say this, right? That these steps are not just the inaugural steps for a great beginning and a great future, but they're pivotal. And let me just include here, and I will close. When the Jews were chased out of Portugal, right, they went to Brazil, and then they found their way to Barbados. And so whoever is Jewish in the crowd, let me just say this: Baruch haba Meshem Adonai Yeshua HaMashiach. Right? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Jesus the Messiah. That Messiah influenced Barbados to open its doors to the Jewish people. And our sugar became better. Our water became better. The Jewish people brought the technology that was good then to Barbados then and made it the greatest economic force, that small island, that caused Cromwell to want to reinvade us, because we are the ones who funded the British Empire as the first colony. And so setting that pace for what we need to do today, we know that there is going to be, out of these discussions today, I see the flag of Israel, it's very important to know that there is always a divine component to blessing things that honor certain things. And we will go into those certain things, I'm sure, later on. Thank you.
Okay, Roger Forrester. Yes, we'd love to hear your comments. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, I echo the sentiments of my colleague here in thanking Ambassador and the team for bringing us together. I'm not as great a preacher as my friend here would be, but what I know is that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. And it is very important when we move in the Spirit that we understand that the connectedness is within all of us. And when we develop any project or any program, as long as it's with the people in mind, it will succeed. And the port that we're developing, the Port of Good Fortune in Guyana, is an integrated project that will bring in agribusiness and the transport infrastructure that's necessary for the development of that transport corridor. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what products are produced in whichever area, it has to move more often than not by sea, because we are all connected by the sea route. And the project there is moving towards that particular thing. Port-centered logistics is now a big thing almost everywhere. And we've got to be able to bring all of these things together. The synergies that we can create in the Caribbean, starting with Guyana as that force, as a breadbasket to the Caribbean, as they say, is unrealized because we do not have the necessary infrastructure. And the port is a very critical infrastructure. But a point that I like to make is that both government and private sector have got to work together. Because, for instance, if the government don't provide the road networks, the farmer programs, the issue of standards, all of those things will not work if those things are not in place. Because even if farmers produce goods to get to the Caribbean islands, for instance, if we don't have the trade agreements that we spoke about, that Congressman spoke about earlier, they will not have the facilitation that's necessary. If we don't have the integrated networks that the other sister spoke about earlier, we will not be able to move things from one island to the next. So the ferry service and the integration of the licensing and all of those things are very, very critical. And our project is going to be at the beginning, and I thank the team here for supporting us in this venture, and it will be done. And by God's grace, everything will be accomplished that we ought to, as we set our minds to. So I'd like to thank everyone here and the opportunity for us being here at this forum. And we'll have lots of more discussions. But I think infrastructure, and especially maritime infrastructure, is the key and the fulcrum around which everything else will subsist. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to hear from Mr. Harold Lovell, Head of Opposition in Antigua, and want to really hear your comments on this, yeah. And also being a former Minister of Finance. Let's start.
Well, thank you very much, and let me also extend a very special thank you to you, Ambassador, and to the organizers for inviting me to be here today. Certainly, the presentations have been eye-opening, and there are ideas whose time has come. The question of a maritime network with the Golden Triangle is certainly welcomed. My only concern here is that I hope we're not going back to the old days like West Indies cricket, where the big islands dominated and left out the small islands. So I'm saying we need to maybe expand the concept so that not just the Golden Triangle, but we may want to bring in the smaller islands and have the Golden Rectangle. It's an important concept, and it links with the theme that has been established this morning, starting with you, Ambassador Thomas, where old ideas must give way to new ones, and old realities must recognize the new realities that exist. With tourism, with industry, commerce, manufacturing, and all the other sectors, we need a system that links the islands. Today, to get goods out of Trinidad to Antigua, it's a nightmare. So this is certainly an idea that will work in terms of promoting commerce and helping to grow the gross domestic product in each island. We also listen carefully with the Nearshoring Act, which, as I said to Congressman, this is a very important initiative, following on a previous initiative, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which has in large measure fallen into disuse. We need to build a stronger partnership with our close neighbor, the United States, and this idea will certainly help to fuel that growth, that development, to make certain that with increased manufacturing and increased economic possibilities in the Caribbean, we'll be able to integrate our processes, move people. The question of tourism, it will be a boost for tourism, inter-island, people-to-people networking, and closer contact. All of these things can only be beneficial to the region. As perhaps the only active politician up here, I just want to say that we believe that this presents a fascinating vision for the future. And I embrace the ideas from Ambassador Hotak that we need to look to the long term. And I certainly hope that today's meeting can set the basis for a new way of thinking, realigning the actual realities with systems, infrastructure, and processes that meet the needs of today's people in the Caribbean. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We're now going to hear from Lord Orville Thomas from your legal perspective and business perspective on the implementation of this. Yeah.
Pleasant good day, everyone. Afternoon here, night, wherever some virtual are listening. I want to start by saying that it's about time for us to put something into action. I have been in the last 25 years, yeah, I'm a bit older than luck, through several meetings. I sat at the inception of many transitions, including some of them in Brazil, in various parts of the region. What I would like is for us to start setting some milestones as to when, as opposed to what. The what has already been identified. The when is my concern. And I want to go back pre-1632, but to 1532, when the Huguenots actually decided to make a transition in France. And until they did not move, the tie of the Jewish people that had been there prior to the trip towards what we know in Portugal, which was set up and later led to some of the problems they had between Spain and Portugal to the vast region. We will not go into that today, but the point being is that that history has given us a lesson of what to do and what not to do. And I would like really and truly that a year from now, we could look back and say, we seized the opportunity. We did not become the cricketing team of the West Indies that only saw today but never saw tomorrow. We didn't start fighting amongst ourselves who has a big or small island, a concept I do not share, because geographically don't determine the size of the population that can live in a place. Neither does it determine the economy. Guyana is only 850,000 people, yet still has the third largest forest in the world. So I do not look at that dimension, and yet still they are able to be the breadbasket for the entire region with just 850,000 people. So my concern is, from a legal perspective, that we don't get caught up in draconian measures. We don't get caught up in politics, but really and truly, if I can leave with anything today as a happy person, I would like to see us move from red tape into action tapes. That would be my request. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to actually turn over to you, Congressman. You've heard the actual comments, and I actually wanted your take on it, on from your side, what can be done to really facilitate this vision. Yes.
Well, Ambassador, again, thank you for, organizing this. And I know you worked late last night to make sure that the trains were running on time. So to you and your team, I think a round of applause is appropriate. And I want to thank the panelists that have articulated their thoughts on this. From the nearshoring perspective, nearshoring is sort of step two, honestly. We're moving in the Congress to come up with a vision for how America partners in the Caribbean and how those loans can happen to move manufacturing back here. Step one, though, has been mentioned by many of the folks that are sitting here. And I know you could hear the passion in the ambassador. I might even say some frustration that the ideas have been there. It's time for action. And that action is on things like infrastructure and the information technology that supports it. It's also, as we move forward with the Nearshoring Act, to get the resources available to move those companies, countries should be looking and leaning forward to identify those industries, their strengths. I think like a military guy and a business guy. What are the assets that I have available that would make my entity or my nation utilize its strengths and giftedness to be a part of this? So what are take for example, Barbados, what are those industries that would work perfect here? Identify those companies manufacturing in China and begin recruiting them yesterday. Make sure that you have the infrastructure and the assets. And of course, we talk about maritime mobility and all of that. That is a part of step one. And my encouragement is to identify your strengths and what your weaknesses are, understand those industries that you want to market to, identify those countries and those businesses in China, and start recruiting them, and create the infrastructure that's necessary to support them and the package that will recruit them. And we'll get this DFC funding system set up in the Congress, and the money will then be there for those companies to come to the DFC, borrow the money, and make the move and create the opportunity and prosperity. So that's sort of my message to everyone in the room on that.
Okay, that's really significant. Thank you. I love what you said, because we can really start by being proactive, by different countries identifying sectors that they historically and based on the uniqueness of the population can actually host, and then start approaching and identifying companies in China. I think that's an excellent start, plus what we're doing in terms of maritime. Okay, so I'm going to now ask Raphael, what for you, from the numbers point of view, needs to be done? Because I know this has to be financed, this has to be done. So how do we do this?
I first want to clarify that when you look at the numbers that Michael present, we're a venture firm, right? So we are really about creating and innovating, and we dress completely different than everybody else because there is a whole audience out there that it is like us. But one thing that I want to emphasize is the 56 cents to service a bond. It's telling you that the average cost per year of this project in just service an issued bond guaranteed by a bank or IADB, it's $20 million a year. We can actually finance this project with $20 million in all CARICOM countries participating in bond service a year. Obviously, there's insurance fee and other fees, but the point is the average cost if we issue a bond for this is so low. And for us, when we run those numbers, we just don't understand what's going on in the Caribbean, because it's really not that expensive. And if we move now into working with the IADB or IFC or even the US government, I'm 100% sure that we'll get much bigger traction than possibly imagined. Some parts of the project, we already kind of got a green lighted from project finance banks, okay? It's the corridor Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago. The reason that was created first, it's because it's the quickest way financially we can private place it. Okay, so we had to understand first, what are the banks are willing to risk? You know, government risk is different than banking risk, assessment. So we know that that corridor is possible. Also, Trinidad and Tobago is one of the few islands in the region that has ferry experience. They already operated a very good ferry service between Trinidad and Tobago. So that experience we need, that understanding in a country we need. And Guyana, it's because without that corridor, there is no transfer of the wealth that needs to take place in the next 10 to 15 years. And the wealth transfer the billions of dollars that can transfer across the Caribbean is only possible if this happens. There is no other way for that transfer to take place. Empowering the whole region, and also with Mark Green initiative, really consolidated the Caribbean as an export platform and generating millions of jobs within the region. So our question as a venture firm, when we look at the numbers, it's what are they thinking? What is it that the government officials don't get, that this is actually a very, very financeable project? Is the problem here, it's because they're not talking enough. So we are here to help them talk. If the problem here is because they don't know how to put this together, we are here to help them put together. And we can only guide and show direction. We cannot hold the hands of them to make it happen. And we are here just to guide. And we can show every single numbers that you saw there. We have a full banking assessment of projections of risk that is ready to be presented to any investment institution that is willing to look at it. Where we analyze every single island in the Caribbean, and we know exactly the route that has the biggest financial backing to get this done. So all they have to do is, as Michael said, ask me, and we are willing to share.
Well, okay. Now, thank you so much, Raphael. Okay. Before I go to Ambassador Alice, I'm going to first of all now go to Sekou Alin from InvestTT. Okay, Sekou, I believe you're now a panelist. Okay.
Yes, morning all. Morning to all in Barbados. My apologies, I was not able to join you physically as we have a convention actually going on in Trinidad at the same time. I was a little late for the panel itself, but thank you very much for having me, Ambassador. And certainly Trinidad and Tobago is happy to participate in the forum. I just heard the country mentioned by the former panelist, but Invest Trinidad and Tobago, we are the investment promotion agency for Trinidad and Tobago, working with the Ministry of Trade and Industry here. And Maritime, in fact, is one of our sectors that we are focused on in terms of attracting investment. You are correct, the former panelist, in saying that we do have experience in the ferry. In fact, we have 2 brand new ferries purchased from Australia that are operating in between Trinidad and Tobago on a daily basis. I actually see the ferry operating every day out of my office window. And we do have historical experience. My grandfather actually was a ship's captain when there were the ships going up and down the Caribbean islands, Trinidad up to Grenada, St. Vincent, and back around to Barbados, and into Trinidad and Tobago. So I remember the stories that my grandfather used to tell me about doing that, and of course being away for long periods of time. So I think the development of the maritime sector in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as interconnected between Guyana, Trinidad, and further into the Caribbean, is important for us. I would have visited the Saudi Caribbean Investment Forum in Punta Cana about a month and a half ago, and the minister in the Office of the Prime Minister of Barbados also talked about that project and the connectivity of goods and services between the islands. We have had investors approach us in the past for that, and so we're looking to re-engage with those investors to determine the extent to which we can connect them to the policymakers to ensure that connectivity exists. Previously, the congressman was talking about the nearshore manufacturing, and certainly that is an area that Trinidad and Tobago is positioning itself for. We are already positioned in the nearshore services area, but from a manufacturing perspective, given our infrastructure and being a large manufacturer for the Caribbean region already. Our new industrial parks, one that we are currently constructing in close proximity to our second major port, position us very well in the region to attract manufacturing investments. And so the congressman talked about understanding your assets, and we think we do. We have a very good infrastructure, high technical skill from our downstream energy industry and our heavy industrial industry. So many engineers and technically oriented persons towards manufacturing, trade agreements with CARICOM into bilateral trade agreements, the US being one of those. And of course, easy access to a very competitive rate of energy. Our rate of energy in Trinidad, being a natural gas producer and electricity producer, is very low. And so we look forward to engaging and interacting with those companies, and have in fact already been doing so, companies out of the US and China, for positioning Trinidad and Tobago as for that nearshore manufacturing push or increase that we see coming very shortly. So from a manufacturing perspective and from a maritime perspective, we are focused on working with stakeholders such as those here in ensuring that we can connect into the overall growth of CARICOM, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Sekou. Thank you. I wish you were here, but I understand.
Yes,
Very good.
Tough.
Okay. Ambassador Alice, I know you have now been a champion of this vision for many years. I want you in 3 minutes to tell me, for yourself, what has been the greatest stumbling blocks to this happening? Yeah.
Thank you once again. You saved the best for last. Thank you. Our colleague, my colleague here, the Honorable Howard Lovell, we have not left Antigua out. In fact, Antigua and Barbuda also has a successful ferry service between Antigua and Barbuda, and we have that experience as well as a second ferry service in the region. So Antigua has also, besides being the first to register, also have the experience of a ferry service. So we also have the data management company, which is an Antiguan company as well. So we are a small island, but we are very impactful. And once again, the ferry service, we're looking at the larger countries, which Antigua falls under the larger country in terms of trade and importation. It's a huge market there, and Antigua imports over 90% of products. So there's a huge market. So Antigua is not a small market. And we intend to take the triangle or form another one, or rectangle if you want, from Barbados to Jamaica, Antigua. Those are our biggest routes and trade. And then the smaller islands, which we anticipate maybe a smaller size ferry to service the smaller islands. So we have not left anyone out. It's a Caribbean project. It's geared for 15 countries in the CARICOM. And what I would like to say also, that over the years and recently, as far as 2018, the company High Security New Plate has formed a public-private partnership with CARICOM. And a decision was given in 2018. It went to heads of government. So all the groundwork has been done, the walk has been walked, the talk has been talked, the projects and policies have been written, the framework is ready. And if we are given the opportunity for funding, which is one of our biggest obstacles in the region, every island that I've presented through over the years, maybe Trinidad 3 or 4 times, Guyana 3 times, Barbados 3 or 4 times, and many islands that over the years I have presented, our report shows that funding was the biggest issue. Governments just doesn't have the money to put these systems in place. So with our support now from the US Congress and our colleagues around the world, we are looking forward to put these funds into good use and to be successful with this long-term plan of putting systems in place for the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, that's right. I see now, okay, Patrick is eager, and I was headed to you. And so let's really share what's on your heart, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. Not that I wanted to put anybody to shame about who was first with ferries, but there was a boat that used to run the soldiers all around the Caribbean, and it was called the CLM Tanis. Does anybody remember that? They used to call it the banana boat. It originated in Bequia, ran through the islands all the way to Trinidad, and that was my great-grandfather, just so you know, right? So I just wanted to stick that in there. And the ferry service still continues between the islands today. Now, concerning the financing, which is very key, I wanted to come there because I ran one of the largest offshore banks in the world right here in Barbados, right? And then we consulted on the mutual funds in San Francisco to $900 billion US. So I understand the bond process. I understand exactly what you're saying. I understand the hesitancy of governments. My wife is actually the head of the private sector in Barbados as well. And so she'll be here at lunchtime because she had other meetings with other players today, but she's coming. And what we wanted to do, we set up a company called Tanis Consultancy Inc. Not I'm selling, but I'm telling you that if you need this thing done, you actually need somebody in the middle of all these islands, in the middle of all the politicians, private sector, public sector, pulling them together. Now, I will say this, and a lot of people don't know this, but you see those pillars, the social partnership? There were originally 4 that were suggested to Ornartha. You know how I know? It was me that suggested to him. I wrote speeches for him. He was a good friend of mine, right? And Hamila, him and I used to meet, as you know, Ambassador. And so the social partnership was necessary, and I wrote that policy. The first head was Sir John Goddard. And here it is that we need another entity that exists, that emerges today to facilitate this within CARICOM and within each country. And I can assure you, the bank that I worked for was in each territory, and I can see how the different footprints are in each territory. And we can do that with consummate ease because we understand the culture. And so as you come into the region, we want to offer ourselves to you as people who've championed those relationships to make this happen. It has to happen because the future of the region needs it to happen. And I believe that God himself has put us all together today to make it happen. And so my colleague here from Guyana, most of the people who have African looks in Guyana came from Barbados. That's a fact. So when the Guyanese come to Barbados, they're coming home, right? And so this is a region that is all family. That's my point. And those water barriers, as of today, cease to exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, Roger, yes.
If I may, Ambassador, the SDGs, as we know it, 2 of the key components, people and partnerships. And unless we get those 2 things right, nothing will happen. You know, when you integrate public sector, private sector, government, non-government organizations or whatever, unless you put the people first with the right partnerships, we will not succeed as a region. And this is not just because Guyana is now at the top of its game, quote unquote. I mean, we've got a lot of things to offer to the region. I have a One Guyana pin that I gave to a couple of people today. And I think I need to recall those pins because I think we need to create a One Caribbean pin. You know, because our maritime boundaries and disconnects is really all in our heads. You see? It's really all in our heads. We've been insular because we've had these policies that, look, each Caribbean territory has to fight for itself. You know, at the beginning with the Federation, when Jamaica had an issue, said, if you take out 1 from 10, you get 0. I mean, that kind of has been perpetuated for a long, long time. But when Ambassador spoke this morning, he made a very, very critical point. If you have the wrong map, it really doesn't matter. If you've got the most accurate wrong map, you'll be in the wrong place. You will not get to your destination. At this point, there is only one choice for the Caribbean: integration. And Ambassador and Congressman here, you guys know that with the support of the USA as a critical CBI partner, we can make this happen. And we don't depend, we shouldn't, and shouldn't depend on any other external force because we have that relationship and it's embedded in our DNA, kind of.
Definitely.
I mean, we've got the Barbadian roots in Guyana. Lots of them, contrary to what he said, lots of the Barbadians actually went to Guyana, but we're not going to talk about that now, eh? But, so the integration started with our foreparents. So there have been lots of integration between Barbados, Guyana, Trinidad. And as long as we examine our paradigms, or maps, or mental maps, we'll see that we have really no differences. So we all have to work together to make this happen. And it can only happen if we change the way we look at things. And someone said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Absolutely.
And we have got to start that like now. I mean, Guyana could produce as much as it wants. If we don't have the expertise from Trinidad, for instance, in the light manufacturing industry and so on, we will not be able to make that technology transfer. I mean, in Barbados, you've got a lot of skilled people here. In Jamaica, the human capital development is another thing we need to talk about very, very critically. Unless we get those right and put them in the place where they can best function, along with the resources that we have available, whether it's gold or diamonds or oil or the intellectual properties that we can develop, it won't work. They have to work together. So for now, we need to look at that one Caribbean vision and actuate it very, very quickly. Or else we'll just be talking again, like 23 years of talking about integration with number plates and stuff like that. I mean, it's just crazy. The IDB found in Guyana that the percentage implementation of projects was 30%. Of monies that they received in support. 30%. I mean, what are we doing?
Well said. In fact, I already share something here. When a project is bankable and the project is not executed, you usually have two major problems. It's either a strategy problem or it's a leadership problem because it's bankable. Okay, so what we're sharing is bankable. And sometimes to the size of a project determines, it requires a particular leadership critical mass. And my intuition tells me, and my study tells me, that perhaps we've not had the actual critical mass required. But I believe this event is going to help provide that in bringing the critical mass with Congressman McGreen, ourselves, the different nations, and bring leaders from different nations to get this done. I really believe so. Okay, so let's hear from the head of opposition for Antigua, and just really give us your thoughts. Let's move forward.
Yes, thank you very much once again. And as we enrich this argument, one of the key factors that I believe we need to focus on is the way we have defined ourselves. Having defined ourselves historically as islands, we tend to see ourselves as small. But when we look at the Eastern Caribbean, for example, we are looking at over 550,000 square kilometers. And that single space, in a redefinition, we see ourselves not as small dots, but rather as a large maritime space with islands within it. Now, this gives rise also to the whole concept of the potential of the blue economy. And I think whilst we're discussing transportation, we cannot exclude the great potential for developing the blue economy and the use of technology in enhancing the potential. So I am happy that we have been able to deal with the whole question of redefinition And one of those aspects of redefinition, I think, is to define ourselves as a single maritime area, and all the potential that comes with that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Lord Thomas.
I like the points being raised about reintegration and redefinition. I would like to add rethinking. And I don't know how many are aware, but that concept of separability is what has caused the biggest issue for me historically in the Caribbean. Contrary to the belief, Dr. Thomas, a question I always ask in my law class is, where did international law started? Anybody? Right here in the Caribbean. Because of the division in the Caribbean, there were two major sailors, ex-British, don't hold it against me, one called Admiral Drake and the other one called Peter Morgan. And they were ransacking the entire region, particularly the US. And they could never yet pin them down because of jurisdictional laws. So they came together and says, hey, we need to grab these guys because we're having a problem. They had more ships than the British Armada put together. Wow. And when they would seize them in Panama, sorry, you don't have jurisdiction here, had to let them go. Seize them in Barbados, had to let them go. Morgan actually got stopped in Barbados 6 times. And every time he got away because of the jurisdictional issues. It's only when they came together and said, we are going to create a system that allows for international jurisdiction seat and hearing, they were able to pin down the issues of security and improve trade into the region. That is when Lloyd's of London was able to step in and make their benefit of profit count. So bankability is an issue, but thinking is a major issue. And whilst the islands remain, I am Barbados, I am Guyana, I am Jamaica, I am this. No, you are just one region. 21st century mentality hasn't arrived. If you want a model, please have a look. Singapore, have a look. Philippines, tons of islands put together to create one region. Yet still, we are still in 1652 thinking you are over there and I'm over here. You cannot connect that way. It has to be seen as a commercial requirement for the connectivity of each part and understand the benefit it will then bring, not just economically, but socially. And the only way I find that migration will be reduced is when you enhance what you have locally. So to protect the borders of the US, they perhaps have to do like what they did in extending towards the Middle East and having their clearing point in Dubai. And suppose it being here that you have your clearing points of check, then it will stop a lot of the issues that arrive on the shores. So I want to call it for what it is today. Rethinking is what will help to redefine. And redefinition is only going to happen with reaction and reintegration. So from a legal perspective, I haven't seen the first integrated maritime law for the region. I have seen jurisdictional law per different zones, which comes to local jurisdictional regulations, and these are all acts. But I would like to propose for the other legal brains, both online and here, how about we start creating, what would the first Caribbean trade immigration system look like? What would it be worth in a bankable sense? What would it save certain countries if we were to have that? How many jobs would it create? And with that kind of rethinking, I believe that a lot of the challenges will start to disappear. So that is, the region needs it. And I'm sorry I'm taking a bit of time. When we can't even integrate how we fly, I mean, it's cheaper to fly to Florida than is it to fly from Barbados to Jamaica. Come on. It is easier for me to get a product into Florida than for me to get a product into Barbados. How could that be? I mean, your grandfather used to take the ship from one island to the other. Okay, what's happening now? Where is the Caribbean Amazon? Anybody never thought about taking at least, or is it the competition that great that mangoes from Barbados have to be better than mangoes from Antigua, even though they're salinated? That's a different story. I'm just trying to make it very real for us to realize it is time, and the time has come, and everybody is an active participant, not an active spectator. That is what is my passion. That is what is my drive. That is what I would like to see.
That's good. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Very good. Okay, Raphael. Yes.
You know, I can match. Everybody addressed every single aspect. I agree. Yeah, you guys, you know. But, you know, in Lord Thomas' voice, you know, integration, cultural integration is a major challenge in the region. I usually don't say that up front, but working in the region, I realize how much some Caribbeans were conditioned to dislike the other. You know, it's really, you know, we say in the US we have Republicans and Democrats, but I have to tell you what I saw here, Republicans and Democrats are okay. Because the division here, it's so big, you know, into cultural differences, even though you don't see why. And as an outside spectator looking at it, like, why? You know, if you're working together, you'll benefit this, you know, and I understand the challenges of achieving that. But for this region, it's no longer a matter of when are they going to do this. If you don't do that, there is nothing to look forward in this region. There isn't. You know, you can run every economic projection here. It's impossible to make this region prosper without integration.
Well,
you know, it's impossible.
Well, Congressman McGreen. What are your comments? What in your view are the major obstacles that you see and the major opportunities? But I really want you to focus on the obstacles from a strategic point of view, on where can we be in the next 10 years, and what do you see are the major obstacles that we'll have to overcome? Yeah.
Well, I think you've addressed many of them. You know, an additional one that I don't think has been addressed is energy. Obviously, the power has to be affordable for industry to come. And so that's one of the reasons why in the Nearshoring bill, we put an opportunity for the use of room-sized nuclear reactors or other forms of green energy and consulting services for the grids, because that is a critical component to building the infrastructure and then supporting the manufacturing that comes. So in the planning process, as you look at the companies you're going to recruit, as you look at the industries and assets that you have available and what industries will work best for you to recruit, as you think about the infrastructure of moving goods and services not only throughout the region, but out of the region to the United States, to Europe, you got to think about power. And I know I think you guys have in this conference a plan to discuss energy, but I think that's the one thing we haven't mentioned today so far on this panel, and it's a critical aspect.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about the cost of power to make concrete, to do the construction work, to support the infrastructure. So it all dials back to some of those simple things. And so that has to be thought through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, with that, we go to Sekou. Aline, I mean, what are your thoughts and your comments?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Not much more to say that hasn't been already said on the panel. Integration clearly of human resources, capitals, goods, services. I take the words of the panelists who mentioned one maritime space and thinking of it as one maritime space, and each of us that has our skills and abilities and infrastructure, a specialized infrastructure to support that one space will play the role that it needs to play in order to make it successful, whether it be from the maritime perspective, the connectivity of the islands, and or from the nearshore manufacturing perspective in ensuring that goods and services are produced within the region that the region needs and are produced within the region that can be exported into the US, Canada, and further markets. So Trinidad and Tobago, Invest Trinidad and Tobago stands ready to play its part in attracting the finance, attracting the investment, working with the stakeholders, looking forward to working with the congressman as the nearshoring bill rolls out, and would really love to maybe possibly do a roadshow in the US. If I can suggest that to the panel, to speak to the companies that would benefit from that and connect in all the various Caribbean embassies that are in DC, including Trinidad and Tobago, to maybe as a next step, actually have a forum of this type in the US market or other markets that would benefit from that, so that we can start speaking to the specific firms that would like to take advantage of those opportunities. So Ambassador, that's what I would recommend and suggest as a next step, and back over to you.
Yes, I certainly like your next step, and we certainly will be discussing that. Absolutely. Yes, I think we were really meant to do some work together about 2 years ago, but we'll certainly plan this event for sure. Now I have about 5 more minutes, and gonna have some concluding words as we really bring this panel to an end. I believe this has been a pivotal panel. It's really why we've decided that this should be the first panel of the conference, because we felt that this issue was absolutely critical to the new mental map that was required actually for the region, for us to be able to prosper in a new environment. You don't prosper in new environments if you do not change when they change. Absolutely. You may not like the change, but if you don't change, you suffer. And blessed are the people that have politicians who can change. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have Ambassador, you have been working on this. I'm gonna give you the honor next 2 minutes to give your last words and close this up.
Okay, so in phase 1 that we proposed, it's a registration between Guyana and Trinidad, but we can simultaneously start in all of the Caribbean countries because this project is not new. They're all familiar with the project. I have traveled the islands, I have presented in every one of them, and most of these islands already have data management systems in place that we can customize and sanitize and start the project of registration in every island. So it's not like we're gonna forget the rest of the island for the first phase. We could continue by doing classifications and planning for integration because this project is needed immediately. We all need trade, we need food, we need to make sure that we can have our agricultural products traded among the Caribbean countries, and this is vital right now. Food production and transportation is our critical and very important issues right now. So this can begin almost immediately, and the teams are ready. Our team is ready to start moving, to start mobilization. We have Optum funds that I would like to thank very much for the support and for bringing this project together. Dr. Thomas as well for inviting me here, and Congressman Green for us putting together as a team to make this a reality and to make this work to become one Caribbean, one nation, and a strong integration and trade among each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we've now come to the conclusion of this particular panel. So I'm starting from Patrick. We can leave. And then I'll hand over to our masters, to our mistresses of ceremony. Let me see.